Ellen sat in her favorite armchair, the room around her filled with the soft hum of quiet. She stared at an old family photo, one of those moments frozen in time. It was from years ago when Rachel, her daughter, was a little girl and their bond seemed unbreakable. Back then, Ellen had been everything to Rachel: protector, caregiver, guide. But now it was as if that bond had faded, little by little, until it was hardly recognizable. The past few months had been rough. Ellen had always prided herself on being a good mother, one who had made sacrifices without a second thought, always putting Rachel's needs before her own. Yet, as time went on, Ellen felt her place in her daughter's life slipping further away. Rachel had become distant, caught up in her own life, leaving Ellen to wonder where she had gone wrong. Then came the words that cut deeper than anything she could have imagined. "Mom, you're just too old to be loved. Nobody wants someone your age." The words echoed in her mind over and over. How could Rachel, her own daughter, say such a thing? Ellen's heart sank. For so long, she had put everything into being a mother, thinking that her love would always be enough. But now, in a single moment, she felt as though she had been cast aside, forgotten. Too old to be loved. Ellen sat there for a long time, her fingers trembling as she held the photo. She didn't know how to respond. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to tell Rachel that she was still here, still full of love and life. But instead, she said nothing. She let the silence hang between them like a heavy curtain. The pain was overwhelming, but it sparked something in Ellen, a realization. She had spent so many years focusing on everyone else, making sure Rachel had everything she needed, never thinking about her own happiness. But in that moment, something inside her stirred. She wasn't done yet. She was more than just a mother. She was Ellen, a woman with her own desires, her own dreams. And maybe it was time she started living for herself. Ellen stood up from the chair, her heart beating with a quiet sense of resolve. She was done feeling invisible. It was time to reclaim her life, to take back the happiness that had been buried under years of sacrifice. She wasn't going to let her age or anyone else's judgment define who she was. With a deep breath, Ellen walked to the door, stepping outside into the fresh air. The world around her seemed full of possibilities. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. The journey of rediscovering herself was about to begin, and she was ready to embrace it. Ellen woke up the next morning with a sense of calm that had eluded her for far too long. The sunlight streaming through the window was warm and gentle, a reminder that each new day was an opportunity. She sat up in bed and glanced around her room, taking in the familiar surroundings that had once been a source of comfort. But now everything felt different. The empty space beside her in bed was no longer just a physical absence. It was a symbol of the emotional distance that had been growing between her and Rachel. But that morning, Ellen didn't feel sadness. Instead, she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of excitement for what lay ahead. She was going to start living for herself. The first step was simple: reconnecting with the things she had neglected over the years. For as long as she could remember, she had poured all her energy into being a mother, into making sure Rachel was happy, healthy, and successful. She had lost herself in the process, forgotten what it meant to do something just for her. But now it was time to change that. Ellen went into the kitchen, the soft clink of her coffee cup breaking the quiet of the morning. She had always loved her morning routine, waking up early, savoring a hot cup of coffee, and spending a few moments alone before the day began. It was something so simple, but it brought her a sense of peace. Today, she decided she would add something new to her routine: time for herself. After finishing her coffee, Ellen grabbed her old journal, a habit she had long abandoned. She had used to write down her thoughts and dreams before life became so consumed with caring for others. As she flipped through the worn pages, memories of her younger self flooded back. She was full of ideas, ambitions, and a passion for life. Where had that woman gone? But as she read her past entries, Ellen found something surprising. There were dreams she had written down that were still possible. Dreams of travel, of learning new skills, of experiencing the world in ways she had never imagined. She smiled to herself. It wasn't too late. That day, Ellen signed up for a local painting class. She had always loved art, but had put it aside to focus on other things. It was time to rekindle that spark. The next day, she attended the first class with a mix of excitement and nervousness. But as she picked up the brush and began to paint, something inside her shifted. She felt free. She felt alive. In the following weeks, Ellen embraced this new chapter with open arms. She began to take better care of herself, physically and mentally. She reconnected with old friends, enjoyed walks in the park, and spent time doing things she loved. It was refreshing, and every day, she felt stronger and more confident in who she was becoming. One afternoon, as Ellen walked through the park, she caught sight of a man sitting on a bench, sketching the trees. He was older, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Their eyes met for a moment, and he smiled at her. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, his voice warm and inviting. Ellen smiled back, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of her heart fluttering. She had been so focused on taking care of others for so long, she had forgotten how to truly connect with someone, how to be open to new relationships. "It is," she replied, feeling the nervous excitement of meeting someone new. "What are you sketching?" The man's eyes sparkled. "Just the trees. I love how they change with the seasons." Ellen sat down next to him, intrigued. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. It was a simple, effortless conversation, and Ellen felt something she hadn't felt in years seen. As the days passed, Ellen and the man, whose name was Thomas, began meeting regularly. They enjoyed simple outings, shared stories, and laughed together. For the first time in a long time, Ellen didn't feel like a mother, a caretaker, or a daughter. She felt like herself, just Ellen, a woman with her own dreams, desires, and the capacity to love again. In time, Ellen realized that meeting Thomas wasn't just about finding companionship. It was about rediscovering the love and joy she had buried for so long. She had been so focused on the needs of others, she had forgotten what it was like to take care of her own heart. One evening, as they sat together on a bench, watching the sunset, Thomas turned to her and said, I think we're both at a point in our lives where we can finally just be." Ellen smiled, her heart swelling. "I think you're right." For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, living for herself, embracing the future, and open to whatever it had to offer. And though Rachel's words still echoed in her mind, Ellen had found something far more valuable: her own worth, her own happiness, and the courage to live the life she deserved. The journey had only just begun, but Ellen was no longer afraid. She was ready to take the next step, and she knew, deep down, that no matter what happened, she would be okay. In this second part, Ellen's journey continues as she takes the first steps toward reclaiming her happiness and independence. She begins focusing on her own passions and desires, finding new opportunities for personal growth, and even opening herself up to new relationships. The narrative continues to emphasize empowerment, self-discovery, and the importance of living life on her own terms. Ellen's life had shifted in ways she never expected. Each day brought with it new experiences, new opportunities, and most importantly, a renewed sense of self. The days when she felt invisible, forgotten, were becoming fewer and fewer. As she continued her journey of rediscovery, Ellen realized that there was so much more to life than the roles she had been assigned: mother, wife, daughter. She was Ellen, a woman who deserved love, joy, and respect. And that journey was far from over. One bright Saturday morning, Ellen woke up with a sense of excitement bubbling inside her. She had spent the last few weeks painting, filling her home with vibrant colors and swirling strokes of creativity. The painting class had become a sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in art and find a piece that had been missing for so long. Today, however, was different. She had decided to take a step further. After months of focusing on herself, it was time to step out into the world in a new way. Ellen had always loved reading about new places and cultures, but now she was determined to experience them herself. She had always dreamed of traveling, but there had always been something holding her back: money, time, and the demands of life. Now, she was ready to break free from those constraints. That afternoon, Ellen visited a travel agency. She had no specific destination in mind, just a yearning to explore, to see the world, to live in the moment. As she sat down with the agent, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This was her life, her choice. "Where would you like to go?" the agent asked with a warm smile. Ellen hesitated for a moment before responding. "I want to go somewhere I've never been. Somewhere that will challenge me. Somewhere different." The agent nodded thoughtfully and began pulling up a list of destinations. Ellen's eyes scanned the options: Italy, Spain, Greece, Thailand. All these beautiful places, each one calling to her. She realized that for so many years, her dreams had been confined to her own home, her own small world. But now the world was wide open. After a few minutes of contemplation, Ellen made her decision. "I think I'll go to Thailand," she said, her voice steady, her eyes alight with the thrill of the unknown. As the agent began booking her trip, Ellen couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just about taking a vacation. This was about taking her life back, about embracing change, growth, and the freedom to be herself. The weeks leading up to her trip were filled with anticipation. She spent time researching Thailand, reading about its rich history, vibrant culture, and stunning landscapes. She learned about the temples, the markets, the beaches. She even took a few online classes to learn basic Thai phrases, eager to immerse herself fully in the experience. As the day of her departure approached, Ellen felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She had never traveled alone before, but she wasn't afraid. She knew that this trip wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about reclaiming her power, her independence. She wasn't just going to Thailand. She was embarking on a journey to rediscover herself in a new and profound way. The day Ellen boarded the plane was one of the most liberating moments of her life. As the plane took off, she looked out the window, watching her home recede into the distance. For the first time in years, she felt completely free. Free from expectations, free from the roles that had defined her. She was just Ellen, a woman who was finally doing something for herself. Arriving in Thailand was everything Ellen had imagined and more. The sights, sounds, and smells were overwhelming in the best possible way. The bustling streets of Bangkok, the golden temples, the vibrant markets, everything felt so alive. Ellen was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in this beautiful, chaotic world. Over the next few weeks, Ellen traveled across the country. She explored ancient ruins, hiked through jungles, and swam in crystal-clear waters. But it wasn't just the places she visited that left an impact. It was the people she met. From fellow travelers to the kind locals she encountered along the way, Ellen felt a connection to the world she had never experienced before. It was as if all the pieces of her life were coming together. Her love for adventure, her passion for learning, and her desire to truly live. One evening, as Ellen sat by the beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She thought about everything she had been through, the pain, the loss, the loneliness. But now she saw it all in a new light. Every step, every challenge had led her to this moment. She was no longer the woman who had been discarded, the woman who had been told she was too old to be loved. She was a woman who had reclaimed her power, who had embraced change, and who had learned to love herself again. In that quiet moment, Ellen realized something important. This was just the beginning. She had so much more to discover, so many more adventures to have, and so much love left to give. And she was ready for it all. Ellen's journey had taken her across the world, but as she sat on the terrace of a small cafe in Chiang Mai, sipping her iced tea and watching the sun set behind the mountains, she realized something. While travel had brought her peace and perspective, the deeper healing was still yet to come. The world had opened up to her, but the world within her needed just as much attention. The truth was, Ellen had spent so many years sacrificing her own desires for others that she had forgotten how to truly voice what she wanted, how to stand up for herself in the face of criticism, or how to reject the subtle expectations of those around her. Her time in Thailand had given her the freedom to see the beauty of the world, but she knew that her real challenge lay in returning home, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally stronger. She had spent too long letting others determine her worth. From Rachel's painful words to the unspoken expectations that had shaped her relationship with her late husband, Ellen had learned to put everyone else's needs ahead of her own. But not anymore. She was reclaiming her voice. A few days later, as Ellen boarded the flight back to the United States, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had changed so much during her time abroad, and now she was returning to a life that had, for so long, kept her in a box. She wasn't sure how Rachel would react, or how her old life would fit with the new Ellen. But what she knew for sure was that she had become someone who could face whatever came next. When Ellen returned home, the first thing she did was walk through her front door and take a deep breath. The familiar scent of her home greeted her, but something felt different now. It wasn't just the physical space, it was her own sense of self. She felt more grounded, more whole than she had in years. The very next day, Ellen called Rachel. Her daughter had been distant since that day in the kitchen, and Ellen hadn't heard from her since. But this time, Ellen wasn't afraid to reach out. This time, she had something to say. "Hi, Rachel," Ellen said when her daughter picked up. Her voice was calm but firm. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said to me, about being too old to be loved. And I want you to know something. I'm still here. I'm still me. I'm not invisible. And I deserve love and respect no matter my age." There was silence on the other end of the line. Ellen waited, her heart beating in her chest. Would Rachel understand? Would she hear her? After a long pause, Rachel spoke, her voice hesitant. "Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry. I've been under a lot of pressure lately. I didn't realize how hurtful that sounded." Ellen could hear the sincerity in Rachel's voice, and it gave her hope. "I understand, Rachel, but I need you to understand something too. I'm not just here to take care of others anymore. I need to take care of myself. I've spent too many years putting everyone else first, and it's time for me to live for myself." Rachel was quiet again, but this time there was a softness in her tone. "I get it, Mom. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't important. You are important, and I'll do better. I promise." Ellen smiled as she hung up the phone. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long had lifted. For the first time in years, she felt heard, not just by Rachel, but by herself. But that wasn't all. Ellen had made a commitment to herself during her travels to not just reclaim her voice, but to use it. She wasn't going to hide behind silence anymore. She was going to live boldly, speak her truth, and stand firm in her worth. That evening, she sat down at her kitchen table, a notebook in front of her. She began to write. For years, she had silenced her own dreams. She had silenced her own desires, convinced herself that they didn't matter. But now she was writing down every single thing she wanted, whether it was starting her own small business, taking up yoga, or even finding new friendships. Ellen wrote about her dreams, her passions, and her goals. She didn't hold back. She filled page after page with ideas and plans. No more waiting for permission. No more doubting herself. She was going to create the life she wanted, not the life she thought she had to live. The next few months were a whirlwind of transformation for Ellen. She started her own online art shop, showcasing the pieces she had painted during her travels. She took yoga classes not to get in shape, but to reconnect with her body in a way she hadn't in years. She rekindled old friendships and made new ones, all while continuing to work on her painting and traveling. And slowly, but surely, she began to rebuild her relationship with Rachel. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had their ups and downs, but Ellen never wavered in her commitment to herself. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a woman with her own dreams, her own voice, and her own worth. One evening, as Ellen and Rachel sat down for dinner, Rachel looked at her mother with a smile. "You've changed, Mom," she said softly. "You're different. In a good way." Ellen smiled back, her heart full. "I have. And I'm finally happy with who I am. I'm not just your mom anymore. I'm Ellen. And that's enough." And for the first time in a long time, Ellen knew that she had finally found herself strong, empowered, and ready for whatever life had to offer. The journey wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. But Ellen was no longer afraid. She had reclaimed her voice, and now she was ready to live the life she had always dreamed of. As Ellen continued her journey of self-discovery, the world around her seemed to transform as well. Every day was a new opportunity, and with each passing week, she felt herself growing stronger and more confident. The courage to speak her truth had changed her, and with it came an undeniable sense of freedom. She was no longer the woman who had put everyone else's needs above her own. She was the woman who was finally making space for her own happiness, her own dreams, and her own voice. It wasn't just the grand gestures that marked her transformation. It was the small, everyday moments that proved she had truly changed. One afternoon, Ellen received a message from a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. It was Carol, her old neighbor from the neighborhood where she had lived for many years. Carol had always been one of Ellen's closest confidants, someone who shared in her joys and her struggles. But over the years, they had lost touch, both caught up in their own busy lives. The message was simple but powerful. Hey Ellen, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I heard you've been doing some amazing things. Would you be interested in catching up? It's been too long. Ellen smiled as she read the message. Her heart warmed at the thought of reconnecting with someone who had meant so much to her. She quickly typed back, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Yes, I'd love to catch up. Let's meet for coffee soon. The meeting with Carol was everything Ellen needed. Over coffee, the two women reminisced about their old lives, the ups and downs, and everything in between. Carol was amazed by how much Ellen had changed. I can't believe how much you've grown, Carol said, her voice full of admiration. You seem different, happier, like you finally found yourself. Ellen chuckled softly, taking a sip of her coffee. I have. It's taken me a while, but I'm finally in a place where I feel like I'm living for me, not for anyone else. And it's freeing. Carol nodded, understanding the weight behind Ellen's words. I can see that. I think we both lost ourselves for a while, didn't we? The conversation lingered, but it wasn't about the past. It was about the future. For the first time, Ellen didn't feel the need to hide behind any roles. She wasn't just a mother, a wife, or a daughter. She was Ellen, a woman who had spent years giving to others, but now she was ready to give to herself. And in that moment, she realized how important it was to reconnect with the people who mattered most. Over the next few months, Ellen continued to make new memories, not only for herself but with the people she loved. She started traveling more, visiting art galleries, and taking cooking classes. She found joy in the small things, the simple act of making a beautiful meal, the quiet moments with a book, the laughter shared with friends. These moments filled her soul in ways she never thought possible. But one of the most important changes was her evolving relationship with Rachel. After their conversation, Rachel seemed to understand her mother's need for independence, and they slowly began to rebuild their bond. It wasn't easy, but they were making progress. Ellen no longer felt the need to apologize for her own happiness, and Rachel began to see her mother as more than just a parent. She saw her as a woman who deserved respect, love, and a life of her own. One evening, as Ellen sat in the kitchen preparing dinner, Rachel came into the room and sat down at the table. It had been a while since they'd had a heart-to-heart, but tonight felt different. Mom, Rachel began, her voice soft, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you've changed and how you've started living for yourself. I think I've been holding on to old ideas about you, and I've realized that you're not just my mom, you're a person, too. And I want to respect that. Ellen looked up from her chopping board, her heart swelling with emotion. She smiled warmly. I appreciate that, Rachel. I'm still your mom, and I'll always be here for you, but I'm also me, a woman who deserves to live her life fully. And I hope you can see that. Rachel smiled, a genuine smile this time, the kind that showed she understood. I do. I really do. I think I'm learning from you, Mom, to live my life for myself, too. Ellen walked over and gave her daughter a hug, the years of tension between them melting away in that moment. It was a moment of reconciliation, a turning point in their relationship. Rachel was finally seeing her mother not just as the person who had always been there for her, but as an individual in her own right. And Ellen was starting to realize that the more she allowed herself to live, the more she had to give to the people she loved. The following weeks were filled with new beginnings. Ellen decided to start teaching art classes for other women, women who, like her, had spent years putting themselves last. She wanted to empower them to explore their creative sides and rediscover their passions. The classes were a hit, and Ellen felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. She also began writing again. For years, her journal had been a silent companion, holding her deepest thoughts and desires. But now Ellen had found a new outlet, one that allowed her to express herself, not just on paper, but in the world. She began writing about her experiences, her struggles, and her triumphs, hoping that her story could inspire others to take control of their lives as she had. As Ellen's life continued to unfold in unexpected and beautiful ways, she realized that the journey of rediscovery was never truly over. It was a lifelong process, a process that would continue to shape her and empower her every day. And as she looked ahead, she knew that whatever challenges lay in her path, she would meet them with the same courage, resilience, and strength that had brought her this far. Ellen had found herself. She had reclaimed her voice, her happiness, and her life. And that was just the beginning. Ellen had come a long way since the days when she felt lost and invisible. She had rekindled relationships, embraced her passions, and most importantly, learned to love herself. But despite all the progress, there were still things in her life that held her back. Unfinished business that needed to be confronted and let go. One evening, as Ellen sat in her cozy living room, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating her journal, she thought about the past. Her relationship with her late husband had been complicated, filled with love, yes, but also with betrayal and silence. He had been the love of her life, but their marriage had become a place where her own needs were neglected, a place where her voice was silenced. Even after his passing, the weight of their unresolved issues lingered in her heart. She had forgiven him in her own way, but now, with all the emotional growth she had undergone, she realized that forgiveness wasn't enough. There was still something missing, a piece of herself she had left behind in their relationship. She needed closure, not for him, but for herself. She needed to let go completely. Ellen decided that the time had come to face the past head on. She knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but she also knew it was the only way to move forward. The next day, she drove to the small town where she had once lived with her husband. It had been years since she had been back, but now it felt like the right moment to revisit their old home and the memories that came with it. When Ellen arrived at the house, she stood for a moment outside, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. The house, once full of life and laughter, was now quiet, its windows boarded up. It looked almost abandoned, a reflection of how she had felt all those years ago. But instead of retreating, Ellen took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. She remembered the day they had moved in, so many years ago. It had been a dream come true for them, her and her husband building a home and a family. But over time, the dream had unraveled. The love they once shared had faded, and Ellen had found herself alone in the marriage, struggling to keep it together while suppressing her own desires. But now, she was no longer that woman. She had grown. She had learned to let go of the things that no longer served her. As she stepped into the empty house, Ellen felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The memories were still there, lingering in the corners of the rooms, but they no longer had the power to control her. She walked through each room, silently acknowledging the moments she had shared there, the laughter, the tears, the quiet nights spent alone. And with each step, she felt herself letting go a little more. Finally, Ellen stood in the living room, the place where so much had happened. She closed her eyes, taking in the memories one last time. It was time to release them. It was time to say goodbye, not to the love they had shared, but to the pain and resentment that had weighed her down for so long. She spoke softly, as if speaking directly to her husband. I forgive you. I forgive the past. I forgive myself for holding on to what no longer serves me. I release this pain and I let go. Ellen stood there for a few moments, letting the silence envelop her. When she opened her eyes, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was as if the house itself had released its grip on her, allowing her to move forward with a heart full of peace. Before she left, Ellen walked into the backyard, where they had once planted a garden together. The flowers had long since faded, but in their place there were new sprouts, new life. She smiled softly, knowing that this was a reflection of her own journey, one of renewal of new beginnings. As Ellen drove back home, she felt a sense of liberation. She had faced her past, forgiven herself, and let go of the things that had held her captive for so long. And in that process, she realized something important. Letting go wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing herself to move forward without the chains of regret or bitterness. Back in her home, Ellen sat down at her desk and opened her journal. The pages were filled with dreams, hopes, and plans, things she had never dared to write before. But now, with the past behind her, she could finally write without hesitation. She was free to live the life she had always wanted. That evening, Ellen made a commitment to herself. She would continue to embrace change, continue to step into her power, and continue to live fully. She wasn't just going to exist anymore. She was going to live. And as she closed her journal and sat back, she realized that the woman she had always dreamed of becoming was no longer just a dream. She was here in the present, fully awake, fully alive, and fully herself. Ellen had learned many lessons during her journey of self-discovery. She had faced painful truths, let go of the past, and rebuilt her life with a newfound sense of purpose. But there was still one lesson left to learn: the power of love, not just for others, but for herself. It was a crisp autumn morning when Ellen received an unexpected invitation. A small envelope, hand-addressed to her, sat on her doorstep. It was from a local art exhibit she had visited a few months prior. Ellen had been drawn to the vibrant colors and bold forms of the paintings, many of which reflected her own experiences of love, loss, and transformation. She had admired the work, but never expected to hear from them again. The letter inside was brief, yet powerful. Dear Ellen, we've been following your artistic journey, and we believe your work deserves to be shared with a wider audience. We would be honored to feature your artwork in our upcoming exhibition. If you're interested, please reach out to us. We'd love to see what you've been creating. Best regards, the art gallery team. Ellen's heart skipped a beat. She had always dreamed of showcasing her art, but the thought of doing so had always felt like a distant fantasy. But now here was her chance. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. Excitement because she had worked so hard to get here, and fear because it was another step into the unknown, into a space where she would be vulnerable, exposed. For the first time in a long time, Ellen asked herself, "Am I ready to step into the light?" That evening, as she sat at her dining table, her journal open in front of her, Ellen reflected on how far she had come. She had spent most of her life hiding her talents, suppressing her desires for fear of judgment. Whether it was her art, her voice, or her dreams, she had kept them locked away, thinking that no one would appreciate them, or worse, that they would be dismissed. But now, after everything she had been through, after reclaiming her voice, letting go of the past, and learning to live for herself, she knew that this moment was different. She was different, and it was time to honor herself and her art. Ellen picked up the phone and dialed the gallery's number. Her hands shook slightly, but she felt a deep sense of resolve. When the gallery director answered, Ellen smiled softly. "Hello, this is Ellen. I received your invitation, and I'd love to be a part of the exhibition." The director's voice was warm and welcoming. "That's wonderful. We're so excited to have you. When can we meet to discuss the details?" As they set a time to meet, Ellen's heart swelled with pride. She was taking a leap of faith, something she had never done before. For years, she had been too afraid to take the risks that would allow her to grow. But now she was ready. The exhibition was scheduled for 2 months later, and over the next few weeks, Ellen threw herself into her work. She painted with a passion she hadn't felt in years, each stroke of the brush a declaration of her own worth. She poured her emotions into each piece, letting her creativity flow freely without inhibition. As the opening night of the exhibition approached, Ellen felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had poured so much of herself into this moment, and the idea of showing her work to the world was both thrilling and terrifying. But deep down, she knew that she was no longer the woman who had once feared rejection. She had faced so much adversity and had come out stronger each time. This was just another step in her journey, and she was ready to take it. The night of the exhibition arrived, and Ellen walked into the gallery, her heart racing. The room was filled with people, art lovers, collectors, and critics, each one admiring the pieces on display. When Ellen entered the room, her eyes scanned the walls, taking in the beautiful, vibrant paintings that had once only existed in her imagination. As the evening progressed, Ellen found herself surrounded by people who admired her work. They asked questions, expressed their awe, and praised her creativity. It was the first time in her life that she felt truly seen for who she was, not just as a mother, a wife, or a friend, but as Ellen, an artist, a woman worthy of recognition. And in that moment, as the night wore on and the crowd gradually thinned, Ellen stood alone in front of one of her paintings, the colors reflecting the light in the gallery. She smiled to herself, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment that she had never felt before. She had made it. As she left the gallery that night, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come. From a woman who had hidden her talents, her dreams, and her heart behind layers of self-doubt, to a woman who was now living her truth, stepping into the light with love, confidence, and purpose. But the most important realization of all was this: love had been the key to everything. Love for herself. The love she had been searching for, not from others, but from within. For the first time in years, Ellen felt whole. She was no longer just living, she was thriving. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, the stars twinkling above her, she knew that this was only the beginning. The world was full of possibilities, and she was finally ready to embrace them all. Ellen's life had truly transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The journey from self-doubt to self-empowerment had been long, but it had led her to places of joy, peace, and fulfillment. Her art was being celebrated, her relationships were healing, and she was beginning to feel like she was truly living instead of merely existing. But in the midst of all her newfound freedom and happiness, Ellen began to feel an unsettling sense of restlessness. The world outside had become her canvas, her gallery, her friends, her passions. Yet deep within, there was a lingering question she hadn't fully addressed. What did she truly want for the rest of her life? The question wasn't about her art or her career. It wasn't about her relationship with Rachel or even her past. It was about the future, the next chapter in her life. For so long, Ellen had played the role of caretaker, of the one who put everyone else's needs before her own. Even as she had come into her own power, she found herself still adjusting to the idea that she could choose her future, that she didn't need permission from anyone to take the reins of her life. The first clue that something was shifting inside her came when she received a letter from an old acquaintance. It was from Marcus, an old friend she had known from her college days. They had lost touch over the years, but she had fond memories of him, of their long conversations about art, philosophy, and life. He had always been a kindred spirit, someone who understood her in ways others didn't. The letter was unexpected, yet it felt familiar. Marcus had heard about Ellen's art exhibition and was deeply moved by her work. He wrote that he was planning a trip to her city and would love to reconnect. Ellen hadn't thought about Marcus in years, but the idea of seeing him again stirred something deep inside her. She felt a pull, a curiosity, a desire to reconnect, to see where life had taken him and whether there might be something more between them. As she sat with the letter in her hands, she was struck by a profound realization. She didn't have to follow any prescribed path anymore. She didn't have to stay in her small circle, bound by expectations. She had the power to choose, to decide what was best for her, whether it was rekindling an old friendship, exploring something deeper, or just continuing to walk the path of self-discovery she had started on her own. A few days later, Ellen found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, taking a long, hard look at the woman staring back at her. She had come so far. She had let go of the old stories, the ones that defined her as the invisible, self-sacrificing woman. She had shed the layers of doubt, fear, and resentment that once held her back. But now, as she stood on the threshold of the unknown, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Was she ready for the next chapter? Did she even know what it would look like? That evening, she picked up the phone and called Marcus. "Hey, Marcus," she said, her voice warm but tentative. "I got your letter. I'd love to meet up while you're in town." Marcus's voice on the other end of the line was full of excitement. "I'm glad you got it. I've been following your work. I'm really proud of you, Ellen." There was a pause as Ellen took a deep breath, feeling the excitement rising in her chest. "Thank you. It's been a long road. I've learned so much about myself, and I'm still learning." "You've always been someone who inspired others without even knowing it," Marcus said. "I'm really looking forward to catching up." As they set a time to meet, Ellen couldn't help but feel a sense of possibility. This meeting wasn't just about reconnecting with an old friend. It was about exploring what was still out there for her. She had spent so many years in a role that others had defined for her. Now, she was taking the reins of her own life, and the world seemed wide open. She was choosing this path for herself, without limitations or expectations. The day Marcus arrived, Ellen felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and curiosity. She had no idea what would come of this meeting, but she had learned to trust the process of life. Whatever happened, it was hers to experience. They met at a quaint coffee shop in the heart of the city, where they used to visit when they were in college. As soon as they sat down, it felt as if no time had passed. They talked about old memories, their lives, and everything in between. But as the conversation turned deeper, Ellen realized just how much had changed in her life. She was no longer the woman who clung to the past or lived for the approval of others. She had become someone who made choices for herself, someone who knew what she wanted and what she didn't. As the evening wore on, Marcus's tone shifted slightly. "Ellen," he said softly, "I've been thinking about something. I'm glad to see you so happy. I'm glad to see you living for yourself. But I have to admit, I've always felt that there was something between us, something that we never really explored." Ellen's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air between them, charged with a quiet intensity. She smiled, her heart racing. "I've thought about that too, Marcus. But I think I'm in a place where I'm just starting to understand who I am, outside of everything else. And that's a journey I'm really enjoying." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get that, and I respect it. I just wanted to tell you that I've always cared about you." Ellen felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. The truth was, she didn't need anyone else to define her happiness. She had already done the hard work of finding herself, of living for herself, and now she was open to whatever came next, whether it was a deep friendship, a new romance, or simply a chance to keep exploring life's possibilities. As she walked away from the coffee shop that night, Ellen realized something profound. She had finally reached a place where her choices were her own. She wasn't living for anyone else's expectations. She was living for herself, with the freedom to choose the life she wanted to lead, and the power to change it whenever she desired. And that, more than anything, was the true meaning of freedom. The weeks following Ellen's reunion with Marcus felt like a series of small awakenings. Her life, once carefully structured around duties and obligations, was now filled with possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. She had embraced the freedom of choosing her own path, and in doing so had opened herself to new experiences, new people, and most profoundly new emotions. Her art continued to thrive. The gallery where her works were displayed had gained significant attention, and her pieces were being sold to collectors who appreciated not only the beauty of her work, but also the raw emotion it conveyed. Ellen had found her voice in a way she never had before, and the recognition of that was both humbling and empowering. But as her art flourished, Ellen also began to explore something deeper within herself. For all the strides she had made in reclaiming her life, there was still one part of her heart that she hadn't fully explored: vulnerability. Ellen had always prided herself on her strength. She had survived difficult marriages, raised a daughter on her own, and built a life from the ground up. But as she spent more time with Marcus, a part of her began to realize that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength she had long avoided, fearing it would expose her to hurt, to disappointment. But perhaps, just perhaps, allowing herself to be vulnerable could open the door to deeper connections, both with others and with herself. One evening, as Ellen sat in her favorite chair, sipping tea and reflecting on her journey, she received a message from Rachel. It had been a while since they'd last spoken. Rachel had been busy with her own life and had been pursuing her own path of growth. But Ellen knew that their relationship was healing, albeit slowly. The message read, "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about us lately. I want to talk. Can we meet? I miss you." Ellen's heart fluttered. There had been so much pain between them, so many words left unsaid. But over time, Ellen had come to understand that healing came from both sides. She had forgiven Rachel, but the real work was in rebuilding their relationship, in creating a space where they could both be vulnerable and open with each other. Ellen quickly replied, "Of course, Rachel. I'd love to see you. Let's meet at the park tomorrow." The next day, they met in the same park where Rachel used to play as a child. It was a place that held many memories, some bittersweet, some joyful, but today, it felt like the perfect setting for their reunion. Ellen arrived early, her heart pounding with anticipation. When Rachel appeared, Ellen stood up and smiled, though her nerves were evident. They embraced, a quiet, heartfelt hug that spoke volumes. The years of estrangement had taken their toll. But this moment, the simple act of reconnecting, felt like the first step toward something new. They sat on a bench, the sound of children playing in the background, the sun casting a warm glow over everything. "I've missed you so much," Rachel said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I hurt you, Mom. I don't know how to make up for it." Ellen's heart swelled. This wasn't the conversation she had expected, but it was the one she had been waiting for. She could feel the weight of Rachel's words, the vulnerability behind them. "I know, sweetheart," Ellen replied, her voice steady but full of warmth. "And I know you've been through a lot. I've hurt too. But I think we've both been afraid to face it, afraid of what might happen if we really open up." Rachel looked at her, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Mom. I know I've taken you for granted, and I'm sorry. I was scared of how you'd see me, scared that I wasn't good enough." Ellen reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to be perfect, Rachel. I've never expected you to be. I just want you to be real. I want us to be able to talk, to share, to be vulnerable with each other." Rachel's lips trembled as she nodded. "I don't know where to start, but I want to try." The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were tears, pauses, and moments of silence as they both navigated the pain of the past and the hope of the future. But through it all, Ellen realized something profound. Vulnerability was not about being weak. It was about being brave enough to face the truth, to open your heart even when it felt risky. It was about trusting that love, in its purest form, could heal and rebuild what had been broken. As they talked, Ellen let go of the lingering anger and disappointment she had held onto for so long. She saw Rachel, not as the daughter who had hurt her, but as a woman, someone who was learning and growing just like she had. "I've made mistakes too," Ellen said, her voice full of honesty. "I've held on to so much fear and pride, and it has kept me from being fully present with you. But I'm here now. I'm here, and I want to keep growing with you. Together." Rachel wiped her tears and smiled. "I want that too, Mom. I really do." They sat together for a long time, letting the words and the healing soak in. When they finally stood up to leave, it felt like a new chapter was beginning for both of them. A chapter not of perfection, but of authenticity. It wasn't about fixing everything in one conversation, but about taking the first step toward understanding, acceptance, and unconditional love. Later that night, as Ellen lay in bed, she reflected on the day. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Vulnerability had always seemed like a threat to her, but now she saw it as a gift. The gift of connection, the gift of growth, and the gift of embracing the truth of who we are, flaws, mistakes, and all. The freedom that came with vulnerability was unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't easy, and it didn't always feel comfortable, but it was real. And that, Ellen realized, was the most important thing. The days following Ellen's conversation with Rachel were filled with quiet moments of reflection and quiet growth. For the first time in a long time, Ellen felt the peace she had been searching for. Peace within herself and peace in her relationship with her daughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Her life had changed so much in the past few years. She had transformed from a woman who lived for others to a woman who finally lived for herself. She had rediscovered her art, rebuilt her relationships, and most importantly, she had found the courage to be vulnerable, to ask for what she needed, and to embrace the truth of who she was. But as much as she had learned, there was one final lesson that she had yet to fully grasp: the importance of letting go. For all the progress she had made, Ellen had still been holding on to some old habits, some old fears. She still found herself holding back in certain areas of her life, afraid to fully step into the unknown, afraid that if she gave too much, she might lose it all again. It wasn't that she didn't trust herself. It was that she hadn't fully let go of the fear that had once controlled her. But as she sat in her living room, watching the sunlight spill across the room, Ellen felt a shift. She realized that, in many ways, she had already let go. The emotional walls she had built up over the years had begun to crumble, and she was finally ready to let herself live completely, without fear, without hesitation. That evening, Ellen received another message from Marcus. They had kept in touch, and he had become a constant source of support and encouragement in her life. Though they hadn't yet explored anything romantic, their connection had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was simple, grounded, and honest, and it felt like the kind of relationship that could grow naturally without pressure or expectations. The message read, "Ellen, I've been thinking about everything we've talked about, and I wanted to ask if you'd like to go on a trip with me. Just a weekend away to some place quiet. No agenda. Just us, the mountains, and some space to think." Ellen smiled as she read the message. The idea of a weekend away felt like the perfect next step. A chance to spend time with someone she trusted, without any pressure, just a simple exploration of what could be. She replied, feeling a sense of peace settle in her heart. "I'd love that, Marcus. Let's make it happen." As she hit send, Ellen felt a profound sense of release. She was letting go of the old fears that had once kept her from fully embracing life. She wasn't looking for perfection anymore. She wasn't searching for something that would complete her. She was already whole. She was already enough. The weekend came, and Ellen and Marcus drove out to a quiet cabin in the mountains. There was something about the simplicity of it all. The fresh air, the distant sound of a river flowing, the quiet hum of the trees, that allowed Ellen to fully let go. It was just her and Marcus, and for the first time in a long time, Ellen felt that she could fully breathe. They spent their days hiking, talking, and laughing, simple pleasures that had once seemed so far out of reach. Ellen realized that she didn't need anything grand to feel fulfilled. She didn't need validation from anyone or anything. She had everything she needed within herself. One evening, as they sat by a crackling fire, Marcus turned to Ellen and said, "You've changed, Ellen. I can see it. You're not the same woman you were when I first met you. You've come into your own. It's beautiful." Ellen looked at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I have," she agreed, "and I'm so proud of who I've become. I've learned that happiness doesn't come from what we achieve or how others see us. It comes from the inside, from knowing that we are enough, no matter what." Marcus nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "You've learned that the hard way, haven't you?" Ellen chuckled softly. "Yes, I have. But I think I'm finally ready to embrace everything. My past, my present, and my future. I'm not afraid anymore." Marcus reached out and gently took her hand, squeezing it in a gesture of support. "I'm glad you're ready, because whatever comes next, I want to be part of it." Ellen looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know where this journey would take her, whether it would lead to love or something else entirely. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to control it. She was simply living in the moment, open to whatever came next. As the fire crackled between them, Ellen knew that this was a new beginning, not just with Marcus, but with herself. She had done the hard work. She had embraced vulnerability, let go of the past, and allowed herself to step into her true power. She had found peace, and that was enough.